Okay, so let's look for a cozy place to read. Oh, this is so pretty. Do I have any chair here? I don't think I have any chairs. It would be nice to have chairs here, though. Cooking the fire. Let's do this. Okay, so I did a little bit of breaking the law to complete the series here. So, yeah, this one I had to take it from someone's house. So, yeah, because I thought that I had like 6 books. I didn't know how many they were. And yeah, I was like, oh, is it difficult to get? And okay, I ended up taking it. I borrowed it for a while. I don't know if I'll return it, but let's just say I borrowed it. Okay, so this is the first series that I actually completed. So let's see what it is. I haven't read any of the books yet. Let us start. The Poison Song, Book 1 by Bristin Zell. It was beginning again, even though everything seemed serene, the last embers crackling in the hearth. Young servant girl and her child slumbering in a chair by the door, a tapestry half finished against the wall, waiting to be completed tomorrow. One of the moons visible through a milky cloud outside the window, a lone bird, out of sight in the rafters, cooing placidly. Tay heard the first chords of the song strike dissonantly, somewhere far away. The bird in the rafters croaked and took flight through the window. The baby in the girl's arms woke and began to scream. The song swelled in intensity, yet still remained subtle and stately in tempo. The movement of everything seemed to take on the rhythm of the music, as if strange choreography had been staged. The girl rising to the window, the clouds reflecting back red from the inferno below, her scream, all muted, consumed by the song. Everything that came thereafter, they had seen so many times, it had almost ceased to be a nightmare. He did not remember anything of his life before coming to the island of Gorn, but he understood that there was something different in his past that set him apart from his cousins. It wasn't simply that his parents were dead. His cousin Bainara's parents had also died in the war, nor were the other housemen of Gorn or nearby Mournhold unusually cruel to him. They treated him with the same polite indifference that any Indoril has for every other 8-year-old boy that got underfoot. But somehow, with absolutely certainty, they knew he was alone, different, because of a song he always heard, and his nightmares. "You're certainly imaginative," his aunt Ulia would smile patiently, before waving him away so she could return to her scriptures and chores. "Different. Everyone in the world thinks they're different. That's what makes it such a common sentiment," said his older cousin, Kalkorith, who was studying to be temple priest and had a firm grasp on paradoxes. "If you tell anyone else that you keep hearing music where there's no music to be heard, they will call you mad and bury you in the shrine of Sheogorath," his uncle Trifith would snarl, before striding away to attend his business. Only his nursemaid, Eteba, would listen to him seriously, and just nod with a faint look of pride, but she would never say another word. His cousin and chief playmate, Bainara, was by far the least interested in the stories of his song and his dreams. "How tiresome you are with all this, Tay," said Bainara, after luncheon the summer of his 8th year. She, and a younger cousin, Pastor, walked into a clearing in the midst of flowering trees. The grass was very low, barely up to their ankles, and there were big black piles of leaves from the previous autumn. "Now, shall we get back to it? What shall we play?" Tay thought for a moment. we could play the Siege of Arsenium." "What's that?" asked Buster, their constant companion, 3 years their junior. Arsenium was the home of the orcs, off in the Rotharian mountains. For hundreds of years, it kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger. The orcs would come down out of the mountains and rape and pillage all over High Rock, and then King Jolly of Daggerfall and Gaiden Shinji of the Order of Diagna and someone else, I forget, from Sentinel, all joined together against Arsenium. For 30 years they fought and fought. Arsenium had walls made out of iron, and try as they might, they couldn't break through. "So what happened?" asked Bainara. "You're so good at making up things that never happened. Why don't you make it up?" So they did. They was the king of the orcs, perched up in a tree they called Arsenium. Bainara and Buster played King Jolly and Gaiden Shinji, and they threw pebbles and sticks up at Tay while he taunted them in his most guttural voice. The three decided that the goddess Kinarath, played by Bainara in dual role, answered the prayers of Gaiden Shinji and drenched Arsenium in a torrent of rain. The walls rusted and dissolved. On cue, Tay obligingly fell from the tree and let King Jolly and Gaiden Shinji mangle him with their enchanted blades. For the most of that summer, the year 675 of the First Era, Tay was nearly insensible by the power of the sun. There were no clouds, but it rained most every night, so the vegetation of the island of Gorn was bewildering lush. The stones themselves seemed to glow with sunlight, and the ditches burned with white meadowsweet and parsley down. All around him were soft smells of flower and tree untroubled by wind. The foliage was purple-green, blue-green, ash-green, white-green, the white cupolas twisting cobbled streets, and thatched roofs of the little village of Gorn, and massive bleached rock of Sandal House, all were magical to him. Yet the dreams haunted his nights, and the sun continued whether he was awake or not. Against Aunt Ulia's admonishments, Tay, Bainara, and Buster had breakfast outdoors every morning until with the servants. Ulia would hold an interior breakfast for herself and any visiting dignitaries. Guests were rare, so she often ate alone. At first, the servants would dine in silence, attempting gentility, but they broke down and would regale the children with gossip, reports, stories, and rumors. Poor Arnilla is laid up with a fever again. I'm telling you, they are cursed, the whole lot of them. Piece on the fair, and they will piece right back on you. Doesn't little Miss Starcia look, just a wee bit tight around the validation lately? She's not. The only servant who didn't speak at all was Tay's nursemaid, Edeba. She wasn't pretty like the other maids, but the scars on her face did not deform her. Her poorly set, broken nose and her short hair gave her a certain alien mystique. She would merely quietly smile at the gossip, and look at Tay with almost frightening love and devotion. One day, after breakfast, Bainara whispered to Tay and Buster, "We have to go to the hills on the other side of the island." She had used such imperatives before, and always had something wonderful to show. A waterfall, tucked away behind ferns and tall rocks, a sunny grove of figs, and a discreet still some peasant had set up. A sickly oak, twisted into a kneeling human figure, a collapsed stone wall that they imagined was thousands of years old. The last refuge of a doomed princess they now named Marella. The three walked across through the forest until they came to a clearing. A few hundred feet beyond, the meadow sank to a dry creek bed filled with small smooth stones. They followed that into the dark woods, where trees canopied high over their heads. Sporadic red and yellow blossoms burst along the moist underbrush, but they became rarer and rarer as the children marched on under the umbrageous oaks and elms. The air crackled with birds taking a staccato choral piece, a minor chord of the song. "Where are we going?" asked they. "It's not where we are going, it's what we are going to see," replied Vainara. The forest surrounded the three children completely, bathed them in its tenebrous hues, and breathed on them with wet chirrups and sighs. It was easy for them to imagine that they were within a monster, walking along its twisted spine of stones. Vainara scrambled up the steep hill and peered through the thick mass of shrub and tree. They lifted Buster out of the creek bed and climbed up, gripping soft grass for support. There was no path through the forest here. Brambles and low-hanging branches struck at them like the claws of chained beasts. The cries of the birds became ever more stentorious, as if angered at the invasion. One limb drew blood on Buster's cheek, but he didn't cry out. Even Vainara, who had passed like an ethereal creature through impenetrable fortresses, had a brave catch on a bramble, ruining the intricate pattern a servant had woven hours before. She paused to pull out the other braid, so her bright, unruly tresses fell freely behind her. Now she was something wild, a nymph, guiding the other two through her woodland domain. The song began to beat like a wild pulse. They were on a shelf of stone, below a cliff overlooking a tremendous gorge, staring over an expanse of cinder. It looked like the scene of a tremendous battle, a holocaust of fire. Charred boxes, weaponry, animal bones, and detritus, too annihilated to be identified, littered the ground. Speechless, Tay and Buster stepped into the black field. Vainara smiled, proud that she had finally found something of true wonder and mystery. "What is this place?" asked Buster at last. "I don't know," Vainara shrugged. "I thought at first that it was some kind of ruin, but now I think it's a junk pile. Just not like any junk pile I have ever seen. Just look at this stuff." The three began an unorganized survey of the dusty mounds of refuse. Vainara found a twisted sword, only lightly blackened by flame, and began polishing it to read the inscriptions on the blade. Buster amused himself by breaking brittle boxes with his hands and feet, imagining himself a giant of unbelievable strength. A battered shield attracted Tay. There was something about it that reverberated with the sound of the song. He pulled it out and wiped its surface clean. "I have never seen that crest before," said Vainara, looking over Tay's shoulder. "I think I have, but I don't remember," Tay whispered, trying to conjure the memory from his dreams. He was sure he had seen it there. "Look at this," Buster cried, interrupting Tay's thoughts. The boy was holding up a crystal orb as his hand moved over the surface, brushing away grit and dust. A key in the song rose, which sent a shiver through Tay's entire body. Vainara ran over and took Buster's treasure, but Tay felt paralyzed. "Where did you find that?" she gasped, gazing into the swirl beneath the crystal surface. "Over that wagon," Buster gestured toward the heap of blackened wood, barely discernible from the other piles, but for its scarred spokes. Vainara began digging into the half-collapsed structure, so only her feet could be seen. The song built in potency, sweeping over Tay. He began walking toward Buster slowly. "Give me that," he whispered in a voice he could barely recognize as his own. "No," Buster whispered back. His eyes locked on the colors reflected in the heart of the globe. "It's mine." Vainara dug through the remains of the wagon for several more minutes, but she could find no treasures like Buster's. Most everything within was destroyed, and what remained was commonplace by any standards. Broken arrows, armor shards, guard bones. Frustrated, she pulled herself out into the sunlight. Tay was alone at the edge of the great gorge. "Where's Buster?" Tay blinked, and then turned back to his cousin with a shrug and a grin. He went back to show everyone his new plunder. Did you find anything interesting? Not really, said Vanara. We probably ought to get back home before Buster tells them anything that will get us in trouble. Tay and Vainara started to walk back at a quick pace. Tay knew that Buster would not be there when they got back. He would never be returning home again. The crystal grove rested snugly in Tay's satchel, hidden under a pile of junk he had picked up. With all his heart, he prayed for the song to return and drown out the memory of the gorge and the long silent fall down. The boy had been so surprised, he hadn't even had time to scream. Now that I think about it, I think I read one of the books in this thing. Because I didn't read this one, but I did read something about these two, Tay and Vainara, in like they went back when they went back home or something. I think I read something about that. Yeah, I think I did. But it's really interesting to know finally know what happened there. Now I cannot confirm the suspicion that they actually killed the other cousin. I didn't even know his name. But yeah, this is interesting. Oh. Okay, so maybe something like the song and the globe have something to do with each other. And the shield with the crest. That was also mentioned on the other one that I think I read. So yeah, let's see how it continues. The Poison Song, Book 2. By Bristin Cell. Tay felt no guilt, which frightened him. Although the long, fast walk away from the gorge, through the woods, across the dry creek bed, he chatted merrily with Vainara, fully aware that he had just committed murder. Whenever his mind strayed from the conversation, and he thought back on the last moments of Buster's short life, the song would soar. He could not think of the boy's death, but Tay knew he was responsible. "You're a mess," cried Aunt Ulia the moment she saw the two children emerging from the woods into the grounds of the Sandal house. "Where have you been? Didn't Buster already tell you?" asked Tay. The scene played itself out as Tay knew it would, every dancer in the song performing their steps as choreographed. Aunt Ulia saying that she had not seen Buster, Vainara, not yet frightened, making up an innocent lie about the threesome not having stayed far, saying he must have gotten lost. A slow but steady rhythm of panic, intensifying as night began to fall, and Buster had not returned yet. Vainara and Tay tearfully. He was surprised how easy it was for him to cry without feeling, admitting where they had been, and leading Uncle Triffitt and a crowd of servants to the junk pile and gorge. The tireless search through the woods at night turned to dawn, the weeping, the light punishment, merely cries of anger, that Vainara and Tay suffered for losing their young cousin. It was thought from their stricken expressions that the children felt guilty enough. They were sent to bed at dawn, while the hunt through the woods continued. Tay was drifting to sleep when his nursemaid, Edeva, came into his room. The look of an unwavering love and devotion had not left her eyes, and he sank gratefully into his dreams and nightmares with her holding his hand. The song wafted among almost imperceptibly through his consciousness as he again had the vision of the room in the castle. The girl and her baby, the bird in the rafters, the dying fire, the sudden explosion of violence. Breathless, Tay opened his eyes. Edeva was stealing out the door, softly humming the song to herself. In her hand was the crystal globe from his satchel. For a moment, he hesitated, about to cry out. How did she know the song? Was she aware that he had murdered another boy to get the globe? Somehow he knew that she was helping him, that she knew all and loved him and thought only to protect him. The next day and the next week, and the next month were all the same. No one spoke very much, and when they did, it was to suggest new places to look for the missing boy. Everywhere had been searched thoroughly. Tay was curious why they never looked into the gorge, but he understood how inaccessible it was. A side effect of Buster's absence was that the tutorial sessions with Kenna Gaffristi took on a more serious, even academic quality. The younger boy's high spirits and meager attentiveness had always cut the lesson short, but sensible Vainara and quiet Tay were ideal pupils. He was particularly impressed by how focused they became during a rather dry history lecture about the heraldic symbols of House of Morrowind. The crest of the Halalu features a scale. He sniffed disdainfully. They see themselves as the great compromisers, as if that were something honorable. Many hundreds of years ago, they were the tribesmen following Raistain who chose, "Pardon me, Kenna," asked Vainara. "Well, what is the crest with the insect on it?" "You don't know the House Redoran?" asked the tutor, lifting up one of the shields. "I know you have a sheltered life in Gorn, but you are surely old enough to recognize—" "No, not that one," Kenna replied Tay. "I think she means the other crest with an insect." "I see," nodded Kenna Graffisi, brow furrowed. "Yes, you will be too young to have ever seen the crest of the sixth house, the House of Dagoth, our enemies, together with the accursed heretical Dwemer in the War of the Red Mountain. Now totally destroyed, thanks to Lord Mother and Wizard. That house was a curse on our land for millennia, and when at last their pestilence was snuffed out, the very earth itself breathed a cloud of fire and ash in relief, bringing night to day for over a year's time." Vainara and Tay knew they could not speak, but they exchanged knowing glances at one another as the tutor enlarged on the theme of the great wickedness of the Dwemer and the House Dagoth. As soon as the lesson ended, they walked silently out of Sandil House until they were far from all ears and eyes. The afternoon sun stretched out the shadows of the spear-like trees surrounding the meadow. Off in the distance, they could hear the sounds of the workers beginning their preparations for the autumn-tide harvest, yelling to one another unintelligibly in coarse and familiar accents. "That was definitely the symbol on that shield you found at the garbage heap," Vainara said at last. "Everything there must be a remnant of the House Dagoth." Tay nodded. His mind was on the strange crystal globe. He felt a light vibration of soundless music touch his body, and knew he was discovering a new cadence of the song. "Why would our people have burned and discarded all that?" he asked thoughtfully. "Do you think the House Dagoth was so evil that everything associated with them would have been cursed?" Vainara laughed. At the height of day, all talk of curses and the evil sixth house were pure supposition, something to add romance to one's life, but nothing to worry about. The two children walked back to the castle for yet another in a series of cold, quiet dinners. As the night fell, Vainara looked through the treasures she had picked up in the junk heap. By the light of the moons, the small shards, the torque with orange gemstones, the bits of tarnished silver and gold of no obvious purpose, all took on a sinister aspect. Revulsion overtook her feeling of admiration instantly. There was a strange energy to them, a tincture of death and corruption that was undeniable. Vainara ran to the window and vomited. Looking out the dark open lawn below, she saw a figure below lighting an arrangement of candles in the shape of a large insect, the symbol of the House Dagoth. When it looked in her direction, she pulled back, but she saw the face illuminated by the tallows. It was Edaba, Tay's nursemaid. The next morning, Vainara left the castle grounds early, bearing a large sack filled with her treasures. She carried them to the dumping ground and left them there. Then she returned and told her uncle Triffid that she had seen the night before, leaving out only what had made her sick in the first place. Edeba was banished from the Isle of Gorn without discussion. She wept, begging to be allowed to say goodbye to Tay, but all believed that would be too dangerous. When Tay asked what had become of her, he was told that she had to return to her family on the mainland. He had grown too old for a nursemaid. Vainara never told him what she knew, for she was afraid. That's the book that I read. And I was wrong. They actually mentioned the name of the cousin. I just didn't remember it. That's the book that I read. Really interesting how everything is kind of advancing in the story. So yeah, let's see what happens with book 3. The Poison Song, book 3 by Kristen Sell. Tay was 18 in the year 695 of the First Era when he first saw Mournhold, the city of spires, home of the goddess. His cousin Kalkorith, already a senior initiate in the temple, gave him a couple rooms on the ground floor of the house he had purchased. They were small and unfurnished, but bittergreen grew outside the windows, and when the wind blew, they filled the bedroom with a lovely, spicy air. The chords of the song did not trouble him anymore. Sometimes he was even unconscious to it. So low and melodic it had become Occasionally, when he was passing through the streets on the way to the temple for his instruction, someone would pass him and the song would rise in intensity before falling away again. Whatever was different about those people, Tay never tried to ascertain. He remembered the last time he had let the song lead him, and called for him to murder his young cousin, Baster. The memory did not trouble him unduly, but he did not want to hurt anyone again, unless he had to. House couriers regularly brought Tay letters from Vainara, still back in Sandal House on the island of Gorn. She may have gone to study at the temple. She was certainly intelligent enough, but she chose not to. In a year or two at most, she would have to leave and assume her place in House Indoril, but she was not in a hurry. Tay welcomed the trivial gossipy news the letters brought, and responded back with news of his own studies and romances. In his 3rd month in Mournhold, he had already met a girl. She was also a student at the temple, and her name was Akra. Tay wrote enthusiastically about her to Vainara, describing her as having the mind of Sotha, Sil, the wit of Vivek, and the beauty of Almalexia. Vainara replied back merrily that if she had known how blasphemous students of the temple were allowed to be, she might have become an initiate herself. "You're very devoted to your cousin." Akra laughed when Tay showed her the letter. "Am I looking at the last remains of a thwarted romance?" She's lovely, but I never thought of her that way." Tay scoffed. "It has never particularly interested me, thank God. If she is a very close cousin then." Tay thought for a moment. "I don't know. Truthfully, no one spoke much of either her parents or mine, so I really don't know how we were connected. They were casualties of the Word of the Red Mountain. That I know. And it seemed to cast rather a pall on the adults' humor whenever we asked about her parents or mine. After a while, we stopped asking. But you're an Indoril too? Perhaps you're a closer cousin to me than Vainara." "Perhaps so," Akra smiled, rising from her chair. She uncoiled her hair, which had been pulled up in the formal arrangement reserved for well-born priestesses. As they watched transfigured, she removed the small brooch that fastened her robe to her shoulder cape. The soft silken fabric slipped down slowly, exposing her dark, slender body to him for the first time. "If we are..." "What are you proposing, woman?" I sure hope you're not. I mean, yeah, you do you, but not really great. "If we are, does incest particularly interest you now?" As they made love, the song began to slow, rhythmic ascension in Tay's head. The vision of Akra before him darkened and was replaced by images from his nightmares before returning again. When finally he collapsed, spent, the room seemed filled with the fiery red clouds of his dream, and the scream of the woman and her child facing death echoed in his head. He opened his eyes, and there was Akra, smiling at him. They kissed her, grateful to have her in his arms. There's no way this is going to end well. For the next 2 weeks, Tay and Akra were never far apart. Even when they were at study in opposite wings of the temple, Tay thought of her and somehow knew she was thinking of him. They were rushed to be together afterwards, ravishing one another in his room every night, and in a private corner of the temple garden every day. Oh good, you get along well. It was while Tay was rushing to see his beloved one afternoon that the song rose up to a powerful strident tones at the approach of an old, ragged woman. He closed his eyes and tried to quiet it, but he looked again at her, purchasing cork bulb papyrus from a street vendor. He knew who she was. His old nursemaid from Gorn, Edeba. She who had abandoned him without even a farewell to join her family on the mainland. She didn't see him, and as she passed down the street, Tay turned and began to follow. They walked through shadowy passageways into the very poorest part of the city, a quarter which was as alien to him as the wildest principality of Akavir. She unlocked a small wooden door on a street without a name, and he finally called out her name. She didn't turn, but when he followed, he found that the door had been left ajar. The chamber was murky and damp, like a cave. She stood facing him, her face even more wrinkled than he had remembered it, etched with lines of sorrow. He closed the door behind him, and she took his hand and kissed it. "You're so tall and strong," Edward said, beginning to weep. "I should have killed myself before I let them take me away from you." "How's your family?" Tay asked coldly. "You're my only family," she whispered. "The Indoril pigs forced me to leave, thrusting their blades in my face, when they discovered that I serve you and your family, not them. That bitch girl Bainara saw me at the prayer of mourning." "You're speaking like a mad woman," Tay sneered. "How could you love me and my family but hurt the house Indoril? I am of the house Indoril." "You're old enough to know the truth," Edeba said fiercely. Tay had bitterly joked about her madness, but he saw something close to it burning in her ancient eyes. "You were not born of House Indoril. They brought you into their house after the war, like they and the other houses brought in all the orphans. It was the only way they saw to erase history and remove all traces of their enemies, by raising their enemies as one of them." Tay turned towards the door. "I can see why you were taken away from Gorn. Old woman, you're delusional." "Wait," Edward cried, rushing to a musty cabinet. She retrieved from it a glass globe that shimmered with a spectrum of color, even in the chamber's gloom. "Do you remember this? You slew that little boy bastard because he possessed it, and I took it from your room because you were not ready to face the facts of your inheritance and responsibility then. Do you not wonder why this bubble drew you so?" Tay gasped, and though he did not want to, he said, "I hear a song sometimes." "That is the song of your ancestors, of your true family," she said, nodding. "You must not fight it, for it is a song of destiny. It will lead you to do what must be done." "Shut up," said Tay howled. "Everything you said is a lie. You're insane." Edward threw the globe to the ground with all her might, shattering it with a deafening retort. The shards melted into the air, and that was left as a small silver ring, simply rods with a flat crown. The old woman quietly picked it up and handed it to him, while he stood with his back against the door, trembling. "This is your inheritance, as the bearer of the 6th house." The ring's crown was meant for stamping and sealing official house proclamations. They had seen his uncle Trifid similar ring, crested with the wing which was the seal of the house Indorel. This ring was different, with an insect design which he remembered from the day when Kenna Grafisi had taught the house heraldry to Bainara and him. It was the symbol of the cursed house Dagoth. The song took over all of Tay's senses. He heard its music, smelled its horror, tasted its sadness, felt its power. The only thing he could see before him was the flames of its destruction. When he took the ring and placed it on his finger, his mind was not aware of what he was doing, nor was Tay aware of anything but the song. When he removed his dagger from his sheath and thrust it into his old nursemaid's heart, Tay did not even hear her final words. When Edeba fell, bleeding to the ground, and groaned with a blood-streaked smile. "Thank you." When the veil of the song lifted, Tay did not realize at first he was no longer dreaming. Before him had been flames, the very ones that destroyed the home of his birth, and flames were before him again, but they were flames from the fire he had struck outside the crumbling tenement that were already bursting through walls, consuming the body of his old nursemaid. Tay fled through the streets as people began to call for the guards. That escalated quickly. She's dead. Oh god. And that's only book 3. We have 4 more books to go. That's going to be a lot. Now what happens with House Indorel and Bainara and Tay's lover? That's going to be a problem. That's going to be kind of bad. He's from a supposedly cursed family, so he's most likely going to become enemy number 1 of everyone. It's going to be a lot. Okay, so book 4, The Poison Song, book 4, by Briston Sell. There you go. Akra sat by the hearth in Tay's room, reading her book by the fire. It concerned some minutiae of theosophy that she did not believe in, but nevertheless found morbidly compelling, when the door opened and she heard Tay enter. She finished the paragraph she was reading before looking up. "I have been here for hours, darling. If I knew you were going to be so late, I would have brought more books," she giggled. When she saw Tay's face and the state of his clothing, her manner lost all frivolity. "What happened to you? Are you all right?" "I have been to see my old childhood nursemaid, Edeba," he said in a strange voice. It was a sudden change of plans. I hadn't realized she was in Mournhold. I wish I had known where you were going," she said, rising slowly from her chair. "I would have loved to have met her. Well, it's too late now. I killed her." Akra inhaled deeply, studying Tay's frozen face. She took his hand. "Perhaps you ought to tell me everything." Tay let his beloved lead him to the hearth, where he saw blinking at the fire. He looked down at the silver ring on his finger. "Before I killed her, she gave me this. It's the sealing ring of the house Dagoth. She told me I was the bearer of the inheritance, and the song I hear all the time in my head, the one that called me to kill another boy when I was young, and then Edeba herself, is the song of my ancestors." Tay fell silent. Akra knelt by his side, stroking his ringed hand. "Tell me more." "My tutor, Kenna Grafisi, taught us that the house Dagoth was a curse on Morrowind. He said that when they were all destroyed at the end of the war, the very earth itself breathed in relief." Tay closed his eyes. "I can see the obliteration. I can even hear it in the song. Edeba told me that the 5 houses adopted the orphan children of Dagoth, raising them in their own traditions. I thought she was mad or a liar, but the real lie Was all those years I thought my family was housed in the Rill. What are you going to do? Akra whispered. Well, Edeva told me to follow the song to my destiny. They laughed bitterly, but the song led me to kill her, so I don't know if she would still give me that recommendation now. I know that I need to leave Mournhold. Before I knew what I was doing, I set a fire in her tenement. The guards were called. I just don't know where I would go. You have many friends to shield you if you prove yourself to be the new leader of the Return of the Six Halves. Akra kissed the ring. I'll help you find them. They stared at her. Why would you help me? When you thought I was your cousin of the house in the Rill, you did not mind having me. Thought it might well have been incestuous. Akra replied, meeting his eyes. I have heard the song too. It is not as strong with me as it was with you, but I never chose to ignore it. It taught me more than the ridiculous temple priestess and the priestesses ever could. I knew that my true name was Dagoth Akra, and I knew that I had a brother. The fuck? No. No. Cousins was already too close. My brothers, my siblings. Okay, sorry for that. Excuse me, I had a moment there. Okay. No, Tay said through gritted teeth. You're lying. You are Dagoth Typhon. Tay shoved Akra hard against the wall and ran from the room. As he fled through the hall, he heard the sound of Kalkorith's footfall on the stairs behind him, a percussive instrument in the song that was rising in his heart and head. Cousin, the senior initiate was saying, have you heard about the fire? Tay unsheathed his dagger and turned, burying it to the hilt in Kalkorith's throat. Cousin, he hissed. I'm not your cousin. The streets of Mournhold were lit by the red glow of the tenement fire, spreading through the tight alleyways by the steady and intense gust of wind. It was as if Dagoth Ur himself was looming over the city, fanning the flames his hair had struck. A house guard, running towards the blaze, stopped at the side of Tay, standing uncertainly, swaying before the front door of Kalkorith's house, a bloodied blade in his hand. What you done, Sergio? Tay ran for the forest, his cape whipping behind him by the force of the howling wind. The guard clambered after him, sword drawn. He had no need to investigate the house to see the murder. He knew. For hours, Tay raced through the wilderness, the song pushing him onward. The sound of his pursuer faded away. At last, the trees thinned, and he saw nothing before him but air and water. A cliff, 100-foot long, plunged into the inner sea. The song told him no. It pulled him north, sweetly, promising a place to rest among friends. More than friends, people who would worship him as the heir of Dagoth. As he slowly walked towards the edge of the cliff, the song became more threatening, warning him not to seek to avoid his fate. There was no escape in death. They spat a curse upon his house and threw himself headfirst over the cliff. It was another glorious day in the island of Gorn, the first one in weeks that Vainara could truly enjoy. Uncle Triffith had important company, housemen from far away, and she had been required to attend every dinner, every meeting, every ceremony. As a child, she remembered, she had hoped for some attention. Now nothing was more blissful than time away from her duties. There was only one thing she wanted to do that she had to do indoors, and that was writing a letter to her cousin. But that could wait until the evening, she told herself. After all, he had not written her in many days. It was the influence of that girl, Akra. Not that she seemed disagreeable, but Vainara knew how one's first love can be all-consuming. At least, she wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted to write a letter to her cousin. She wanted She had read about it. As she walked idly through the wildflower meadow, Vainara was now distracted with her thoughts, that she did not hear her maid, Hilima, calling. She was quite startled when she turned to see the young servant running up. "Sergio," she said, breathlessly, "please come. Someone has washed up on the shore. It's your cousin, Sergio Induril Tay." "Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. That's not going to be good." Okay, so no. The lover that was supposed to be maybe a cousin, sort of, in the house Induril, like a far away cousin, ended up being Tay's sister in House Dagoth? Why? But it's interesting to see how everything's falling on together. Now he's reaching his childhood home, in a way, with like big quotation marks. So he's getting to the island of Gorn. Is it the island? He's coming back to the house of Induril with Vainara is at. And Vainara is the one that got rid of the housemaid. The nursemaid. Oh, God damn it. So this is not going to end well. Okay, so okay. The Poison Song, Book 5 by Bristin Cell. For 2 days, the house healers attended Tate in his bed, and Vainara sat by his side, holding his hand. He was feverish, neither asleep nor awake, screaming at the invisible phantoms. The healers complimented the young man's fortitude. Bodies had washed ashore on the island of Gore several times during the war, but never once had they seen one that lived afterwards. Aunt Ulia came in several times to bring Vainara food. "You must be careful, dear, or when he's all well, he will have to attend you on your sickbed." Tay's fever broke, and at last he was able to open his eyes and see the young woman with whom he had spent 17 years, all but the first year of his life. She smiled at him and called for food. In silence, she helped him eat. "I knew you wouldn't die, cousin," she whispered fondly. "I hoped too, but somehow I knew I wouldn't either," he groaned. "Vainara, do you remember all those nightmares I told you about? They are all true. We can talk about it when you have rested some more." "No," he croaked. "I must tell you everything now, so you will know what kind of a monster you called your dear cousin Tay. If there was some way you could have known before, you might not have been so eager to see me well again." A tear rolled Vainara's cheek. She had grown into a beauty, even in the few months he had been away in Mournhold. "How can you think I would stop loving you no matter what you've done?" I saw my old nursemaid, Edeba, and spoke to her. "Oh," Vainara had fear at this moment. "Tay, I don't know what she told you, but it was all my fault. You remember what Kenna Grafisi taught us about the house Dagoth and its corruption? That night I saw your nursemaid making some kind of altar out in the north lawn, using the symbol of the sixth house. She must have been doing it for years, but I never knew what it meant. I told Uncle Griffith, and he sent her away. I have wanted to tell you so many times now, but I was afraid to. She was so devoted to you." They smiled. "And didn't it frighten you? Even more to wonder if there was any connection between her devotion to me and her devotion to the accursed house. I know you, Vainara. You're not one of those women who doesn't choose to use her mind." "Tay, I don't know what she told you, but I think she was very troubled, and whatever she thought about you and the sixth house was wrong. You have to remember that the ramblings of one mad woman are proof of nothing." "There's more," Tay sighed, and held up his hand. For a moment he blinked, and then turned to Vainara angrily. "What happened to my ring? If you saw it, you must have known already that everything I'm saying to you is true." I threw the filthy thing away. Vainara stood up. "Tay, I'm going to let you rest now. I'm the heir of House Dagoth. I was wild-eyed, almost screaming, raised up the war as House Induril, but driven by the song of my ancestors. When we were young, I killed Baster because the song told me he had stolen my inheritance. When Edva told me who I was and gave me this ring, I killed her and burned the house to the ground because the song told me she had served her purpose. When I returned to Kalkorith's house, my love was there, telling me that she was of the House Dagoth too, and my sister. I fled, and when Kalkorith tried to stop me, I slew him, because the song told me he was an enemy. Tay, stop. Vainara sobbed. I don't believe a word of it. You have been feverish? Not Tay. He shook his head, breathing heavily. The name my parents gave me was Dagoth Typhon. You can't have killed Edva. You loved her. And Baster? And Kalkorith? They were your cousins. They were not my true cousins, Tay said coldly. The song told me they were my foes, just as it's telling me now that you're my foe. But I won't listen, and I'll keep from listening as long as I can. Vainara fled the room, slamming the door behind her. She took a key from her startled maid Hilima and secured the lock. Sergio Induril Vainara, Hilima whispered with great sympathy. It's all well with your cousin, Sergio Induril Tay. He'll be perfectly fine once he rests. Vainara recovered her dignity, wiping the tears from her face. No one is to disturb him under any circumstances. I'll take the key with me. Now I have much work to do. I don't suppose anyone's spoken to the fisherman about restocking Sandel's house supplies. I don't know, Sergio, said the maid. I don't think so. Vainara marched down the docks and relieved her troubled heart the only way she knew how, by concentrating on small things. Tay's words never left her, but she found temporary comfort talking to the fishermen about their haul, helping determine how much should be smoked, how much should be sent to the village, how much should be delivered fresh to the house larder. Her aunt Ulia joined the discussion, oblivious to Vainara's well-disguised agony. Together they discussed how many provisions Uncle Triffid and his commanders had devoured during their weeks on the island, when they would be expected to return, and how best to prepare. One of the fishermen on the docks called out, interrupting, "A boat is coming." Ulia and Vainara greeted the visitors as she arrived. It was a young woman dressed in the robes of a temple priestess. As she docked her small boat, Vainara marveled at how beautiful she was, and strangely familiar. Oh no, that's Akra, right? Welcome to Gorn, said Vainara. I am Induril Vainara, and this is my aunt Induril Ulia. Have we met before? I don't believe so, Sergio. The woman bowed. I was sent by the temple to inquire whether word had come from their cousin, Induril Tay. He has been missing from his classes for some days now, and the priests have become concerned. Oh, we should have sent word, Ulia fretted. He came here a few days ago, half drowned. He's better now. Let us escort you up to the house. Tay's resting now, and I asked that he not be disturbed, Vainara stammered. Actually, I know it's dreadful manners, but I need to talk to my aunt for a moment. Would it be too terrible if I ask you to wait for us at the house? You have only to follow the path up the hill and across the lawn. The priestess bowed again humbly and began the walk. Ulia was scandalized. You know better than to treat a representative of the temple that way, she snapped. You can be so exhausted from tending your cousin to have lost all sense of civility. Aunt Ulia, Vainara whispered, drawing the woman away from the ears of the fisherman. Is Tay truly my cousin? He believes himself to be of the House Dagoth. Ulia took a moment to respond. It's true. You were just a baby yourself during the war, so you wouldn't know what it was like. There was not a part of Morrowind that wasn't ravaged. There was even a battle here on the island. Do you remember that pile of wreckage you and they and poor little bastard discovered so many years ago. That was the remains, and after the war, when that accursed house was finally defeated, we saw the little innocents, the orphans, whose only crime had been born to wicked parents. I admit there were some in our armies. The combined forces of the houses would have had them all slaughtered to annihilate the legacy of Dagoth. In the end, compassion prevailed, and the children of the sixth house were adopted into the other five, and so we thought that we had won the war and the peace. By the mother, lord, and wizard, if all that Tae believes is true, then there is no peace. Vainara trembled. He claims that the song of his ancestors called to him and forced him to slay 3 people. 2 of them are housemen, cousin Kalkorith, and, when he was a little boy, Buster. Ulia held her hands over her tearful face and could not speak. And it is only the beginning, said Vainara. The song is still calling to him. He said there were others who knew, who would help him raise up the 6th house. His sister. It must well be an evil fantasy, Ulia murmured. She noticed that Vainara's gaze was now upon the path leading from the docks towards the house. Niece, what are you thinking? Did that priestess give us her name? The 2 women ran up the path, calling for guards. The fishermen, who had never seen the mistress of the house so undone, looked briefly at one another and then followed quickly behind, pulling out their hooks and blades. The front gate of Sandil House stood wide open, the first of the corpses lying close within. It was now an abattoir, painted fresh with blood. There was Anna, Uncle Triffitt's valet, guarded, but still seated at the foyer table where he had been enjoying his afternoon glass of Flynn. Lerian, one of the chambermaids, had been decapitated while carrying some once clean linens up the stairs. The bodies of guards and servants sprawled about the hall like blown leaves. At the top of the stairs, Vainara had to hold back a sob when she saw Hildima. She lay like a broken doll, slain as she tried to pull herself out of the narrow window ledge. No one spoke, not Vainara, nor Aunt Ulia, nor the fishermen, as they walked slowly through the blood-drenched house. They passed Ty's sick room, its door broken open, and no one within, when they heard the sound of footsteps in Vainara's room down the hall. They approached slowly, cautiously, with great dread. The priestess from the docks was standing by the bed. In her hand was the silver ring Vainara had taken from Tae's finger. In her other hand was a long curved blade, splashed, like her once pristine gown, with gore. She smiled prettily and bowed when she saw she was no longer alone. Akra, I should have recognized you by Tae's description in his letters, Vainara said in her steadiest voice. Where is my cousin? I prefer to call myself Dagoth Akra, she replied. Gilfoth's cousin, my true brother, has already gone to fulfill his destiny. I'm sorry you were not here so he could give you a more permanent farewell. Vainara's face twisted in fury. She motioned for the fishermen who advanced with their weaponry. Tear her apart. The 6th house will rise again, and Dagoth Typhon will lead us. Akra laughed. Her words were still echoing as she gave the sign of recall and vanished like a ghost. Okay, that's very good. I'm invested. What are the 2 last books going to be about? So, he got to house of the Induril house, got to Vainara, told Vainara everything. He wanted to resist the call, but he does feel some resentment for the house. And then Akra came, and then she kind of set him free, I guess. so he could follow the song and not resist it anymore. She's holding the ring. Maybe she sent him... maybe she teleported him or something before. And that's why he wasn't there anymore. And then her staying behind was kind of like a declaration of war to the House Indoril. But yeah, this is very interesting. This is really nice. Book 6? Book 6. The Poison Song by Bristin Cell. The Magnesium... That's not a good start. The Poison Song. Book 6 by Bristin Cell. The magnificent sprawl of the stronghold of Indorianon was aglow in the light of the setting sun. Commander Shazard watched it slowly disappear into the horizon as he led the caravan southwestward. It was a strange practice for him to lead the night operation, but scarcely more bizarre than anything else he was facing. He was only 70 years of age, far from old for a Bosmer, and yet he felt like he belonged to another era. He had known the land of East Vardenfell his entire life, every forest, every garden, every small village between Red Mountain and the Sea of Ghosts, and had been home to him. But now it was all different, twisted into a world he did not recognize since the eruption and the year of Sun's death. It made night travel all the more treacherous, but it was a risk he was ordered to take. The Ashmire appeared quite suddenly. If a sharp-sighted scout hadn't seen it and given the signal, the entire caravan might have been swallowed whole. Shazrad cursed. It had not been on the map, but that was hardly surprising. It was a huge unnamed cave, stretching as far as anyone could see. The commander considered his options. He might lead his party to the southeast, towards Tel Arun, and then try an approach due west. As he consulted his map, he noticed a glimmer of a campfire in the distance. Accompanied by his lieutenants, Shazraj drove his square forward to investigate what appeared to be an Ashlander man and woman. "This is no longer your realm," he bellowed. "Don't you know it's been ruled by the temple that these are house lands now?" The couple shuffled to their feet and began quietly walking away, towards a narrow ridge between hill and Ashmire. Shazrat called them back. "Do you know a way around this cave?" he asked. They nodded, their eyes still on the ground. Shazrat signaled to his caravan. "You will lead us then." It was a treacherous winding crossing, almost too tight for the guards. The wagons themselves scrapped as the drivers pulled to avoid the Ashmire. The Ashlander man and woman whispered to one another as they led the caravan. "What are you mumbling about, Nwa?" Shazrat hollered. The man did not turn around. "My sister and I were talking about the Dagoth rebellion, and she was guessing that you were bringing arms to the stronghold at the Fallen Sarano, which is why you chose to cross the Ashmire rather than taking a road." "I may have known," Shazrat laughed. "You Ashlanders are so hopeful whenever you see signs of trouble in the houses and the temple. I hate to dampen your spirits, but what you are speaking of is hardly a rebellion. Merely a few isolated incidents of unpleasantness. Tell your sister that." As they plodded onward, the narrow ridge began to tamper even more. The Ashlanders found a lower-shagged crevasse in the hills and crack from a lava flow even predating Sun's death. The caravan scored the rock walls as it moved through. Commander Shazrat, after 20 years of uncertainty in a land he did not understand, felt a twinge of his old instinct. This, he thought to himself, would be a fine place for an ambush. "Ashlander, how close are we?" he shouted. "We have arrived," Dagoth Titan replied, and gave the signal. The assault was over in mere minutes, as it had been calculated from the start. When the last body of the house guard had sunk beneath the Ashmire, Only then was the inventory of the caravan revealed. It was better than they had hoped. Virtually everything the rebellion needed. Deadrick swords, dozens of suits of armor, quivers of fine ebony bolts, and rations enough to last for weeks. Going ahead to the camp. Typhon smiled at his sister. I'll leave the caravan. We should be there within a few hours' time. Akra kissed him passionately and gave the sign of recall. In an instant she was back in her tent, exactly as she had left it, humming the song. She removed the Ashlander rags and chose an appropriately diaphanous gown from her trunks. Precisely the sort of dress Typhon would love seeing her in when he returned. You're keeping up the relationship? You're keeping up the relationship. Okay. Try not to question it. Go back to the story. Murasa, she called to her servant. Summon the troops together. Typhon and the others will be here very soon with all the weapons and rations we need. Murasa can't hear you now, said a voice Akra hadn't heard in weeks. She turned, expertly removed every trace of surprise from her face. It was indeed Indril by Nara, but not the quivering creature she had left behind at the massacre at Sandal House. This woman was an armored warrior, who spoke with mocking confidence. She wouldn't be able to summon the troops if she could. You may have weapons and rations, Akra, but there's no one left to arm or feed. Dagoth Akra made the sign of recall, but nothing happened. The moment we heard you banging around in the tent, my battle mages cast a diffusion of all magicka. Bainara smiled, opening the tent further to invite a dozen house soldiers in. You won't be leaving. If you think that my brother will walk into your trap, you underestimate his allegiance to the song. Akra sneered. It tells him everything he needs to know. I have convinced him to no longer fight it, and let it lead him, and us, to our ultimate victory. I have known him longer and better than you ever did, said Vainara coldly. Now I want to hear what the song is saying to you. I want to know where I can find Tay. Typhon, my lady, Akra corrected her. He is no longer a slave to your house and the temple's lies. You can torture me all you wish, but I swear to you the next time you see him, it will be because he wishes it, not you. And that will be your very last moment alive. Don't you worry, Sergio. Vainara's Nightblade winked at her. Everyone says they won't break under torture, but everyone always does. Vainara left the tent. It was all a part of warfare. She understood that. But there would be little relish in witnessing it. She could not even watch as the house soldiers disposed of the rebel corpses. She had hoped she would grow numb to the bloodshed after weeks of following Typhon and Akra massacre after massacre. It didn't matter to her that now the bodies were of her enemies. Death was still death. She had only been in her tent for a few minutes when her Nightblade appeared. Not so thought as she appeared, that one. He grinned. In point of fact, all I had to do is ask her nice and point my dagger at her belly, and she was blubbering everything. Oh no. Not too surprising, really. It's always the ones that talk big that crumble fast. I remember way back, a couple of years ago, before you was even born. Got one? What did she say? Vainara asked. The song, whatever that is, told her brother that she got herself caught, and not to return to camp. The Nightblade replied, only a trifle annoyed at having his fascinating story cut short. He's got a half-dozen men with him, and they are going to try to assassinate the fellow that led the Indoril army in the war, General Indoril Triffith. Uncle Triffith, Vainara gasped. Where is he stationed now? Not sure myself, Sergio. Do you want me to ask if she knows? I'll come with you, said Vainara as they walked towards Akra's tent. Cries of alarm sounded. The situation became abundantly clear even before they reached the site. 3 guards were dead, and the prisoner had escaped. Interesting woman, said Garwan. Weak heart, but a strong arm. Should we send word of warning to General Indoril Triffith? If we can find where he is in time, said Vainara. I don't really want... Okay, if it's important to the story, it's going to appear on book 7, so I'm not going to say anything. But yeah, it is kind of weird that, for example, at least today, or maybe it's because Akra's song is a little less intense or strong in her case. So it's interesting that before she cast the spell to go back to the camp, the song didn't really warn her of anything. Because it's kind of stated that the song is guiding them through. So maybe her going back to the camp was also part of the song's guiding, and she was supposed to give that information to the enemies. I don't know. Well, this is the book that I stole from Alor's house, just to complete the whole thing, because this is the last book. I had to look how many books in the series. It's because I didn't want to miss anything, like start reading 1 through 6 and then find out that I'm missing some. So yeah, this is book 7, the last book of the Poison Song series. And if there is more, I'll be severely disappointed. Okay, so let's go. Triffith stood on the parapets of Barsimain and considered the volcano. Metaphors the poets used fell rather flat in his view. A festering wound, it could be called, with its blood like lava. The king of ash, too, could be applied, when one looked at its perpetual crown of smoke, and yet none of that could do, for nothing in his experience would convey the sheer magnitude of the mountain. Red Mountain was many miles away from the fortress, and yet it filled the horizon utterly. Before he could feel too small, however, he heard his name being called within. It was some consolation that thought he was insignificant compared to the mountain. He was still in possession of certain power and influence. General Indoril Triffith, said Commander Rael, "There's trouble at the east gate." The trouble was scarcely more than a skirmish. An Ashlander, drunk perhaps on Sheen, and begun a fight with the house guards at the back gate. As they tried to drive him away, his cousins joined him as soon as there were 6 Ashlanders together, brawling with a dozen of Triffith's guards. If the Noirs had not been well armed, the fight would have been finished almost before it began. It was, by the time the general arrived, with more of his guards. 2 of the Ashlanders were dead, and the others had taken flight. "It's the smoke in their brains," Rael shrugged. "Makes them mad." Triffith climbed back up the stairs and returned to his chamber to dress for dinner. General Redran Borilk and Consular Halalu Notok would be arriving very shortly to discuss the temple's plans for reorganizing the house lands of Morrowind. Mournhold was to be renamed Almalexia. A great new city in honor of Vivek was to be built. But with whose gold? It made his head hurt. There were so many details. A long night of argument, threats, and compromises were ahead. The general's mind was so occupied that he nearly put his house robes on backwards. He also did not notice the shadowy figure steal out from behind the tapestry and closed the door to the bedchamber. It was not until Triffith heard the sound of the latch bolt fall that he turned around. "Slipped in when I was distracted by the fracas at the back gate. Very clever, Tay," he said simply. "Or do you call yourself Dagoth Titan these days?" "You should know all my names," the young man snarled, unsheathing his sword. "I was Titan before you butchered my family and sought to dispel my tribe. I was Tay when you brought me into your house to poison me against my own people. Now you may call me Vengeance." There was a knock on the door. Titan and Triffith did not move their eyes from one another. The knocking became a loud pounding. "General Indoril Triffith, Are you well? Is there something wrong? If you're going to kill me, boy, you would better do it quickly. Triffitt growled. My men will have that door down in 2 minutes. You don't tell me what to do, Uncle. Tython shook his head. I have the song of my ancestors to instruct me. It tells me you made my father beg for his life before you killed him, and I want to see you do the same. If your ancestors are all knowing, Triffitt smiled, why are they all dead? True. In a way, true. Tython made an inhuman noise at the back of his throat and advanced. The door began to buckle at the pounding. It was sturdy and secure. The general's estimate of his life's expectancy at 2 minutes seemed clearly erroneous. The pounding suddenly stopped. A familiar voice replaced the sound. Tay, called Vainara. Listen to me. Tython smirked. You're just in time to hear your uncle beg for his miserable life, cousin. I was afraid you will be too late. The next sound you will hear will be the death rattle of the man who slaved my house. The song is what's enslaved you, not Uncle Triffitt. You can't trust it. It's poisoning you. It let you be manipulated first by an old woman, and now that evil witch Agra who calls herself your sister. Tython pressed the tip of his sword, so it touched the general's throat. The older man stepped backwards, and Tython advanced. His eyes followed the length of his arm to the grip of the blade. The silver ring of Dagoth caught the red light of the volcano from the battlements outside the window. Tay, please don't hurt anyone anymore. Please, if you just listen to me, and not the song, just a moment, you will know what's right. I love you. Vainara stifled her sobs to keep her voice clear and calm. There was a noise on the stairwell behind her. The general's guard had finally arrived with the battering ram. The door splintered and burst open in 2 strikes. General Indoril Triffitt was holding his throat, staring out the window. Uncle, are you all right? Vainara ran to him. He nodded his head slowly and removed his hand. There was only the barest of scratches in his neck. Where's Tay? He jumped out the window, said Triffitt, pointing out into the distance where a figure was riding a guard towards the volcano. I thought he was going to kill himself, but he had an escape figured out. We'll get him, Sergeant General, said Commander Ryle, calling to the guards and to get their mounts. Vainara watched them go, and then kissed her uncle quickly and ran out on her own guard in the courtyard. Sweat drenched Tay's body as he rode closer and closer towards the summit of Red Mountain. The guard was breathing hard, trudging along even more slowly, letting out little grunts of complaint about the heat. Finally he abandoned his steed and began to climb the near vertical surface. Ash blew down the face of the volcano into his eyes. Near blind, it was almost impossible to ignore the persistent clamorous notes of the song. A silken stream of crimson lava, studded with crystalline formations, surged a few feet away, close enough that Tay would feel his flesh begin to burn and blister. He turned from it and saw a figure emerge through the smoke. Vainara. What are you doing, Tay? She cried over the howl of the volcano. Didn't I tell you not to listen to the song? For the first time, the song and I both want the same thing, he yelled back. I can't ask you to forgive me, but please try to forget. He pulled himself higher, out of Vainara's sight. She screamed his name, scaling the rocks until she found she was close to the open crater. Waves of boiling gas washed over her, and she dropped to her knees, gasping. Through the rippling miasma, she saw Tay, standing at the mouth of the volcano. Flames erupted from his clothes and hair. He turned to her just for a moment and smiled. Then he leapt. Vainara was in a daze as she began the long, treacherous climb down the volcano. She began to think of the projects ahead. Were there enough provisions in storage at her house in Gorn for the meeting of the houses? The counselors were bound to stay there for weeks, maybe months. There was much work to be done. Slowly, as she descended, she began to forget. It would not last, but it would be a start. Dagoth Akra stood as near to the mouth of the volcano as she could stand, blinking her eyes at the ash, soaked by the heat. She watched all and smiled. On the ground was the silver ring with the seal of the house Dagoth. Tython had been sweating so much it had slipped off. She picked it up, put it on her own finger. Touching her belly, she heard a new refrain of the poison song of Morrowind begin. I knew it. I fucking knew it. So House Dagoth is not over with Tay. Yep. Yep. I was right. There's a new heir. Which kind of... Maybe that's what she kind of wanted before. I'm not saying that she didn't love Tay, but also maybe she was kind of hoping that he didn't have to. Maybe she was like expecting that she didn't have to make him go through it with the way that he was, in a way, like her, but he didn't seem that determined to do what he needed to do, like killing the general and killing his cousin and stuff. I don't think he had the 100% determination to do that. So maybe this is kind of the best thing for Dagoth Akra. I kind of feel bad that he killed himself. He, in a way, yeah, he was controlled by House Indoril, and also he was controlled by the song. So, in a way, he really didn't have many options on how to end on a good note. Yeah, that's a pity. But overall, I really liked the series. I was really into it. I really liked it. I don't know if this is like... It's never said, right? And if it's a fictional thing or if it's something like a record of something of the survivors. It's not said, right? On book 1, maybe. Book 1? No. It was beginning again. I thought it was in Serene. No. It goes straight into Tay's story. Okay, that was the Poison Song. Book 1 through 7, complete story of the Poison Song. And yeah, that would be all for today. So goodbye, bye bye.